First of all, I want to thank Warner Brothers. Thank you for putting me in a piece of shit, god-awful movie.
Every once in a while, the entertainment industry will produce a work that is so critically panned that it becomes cemented into the annals of history, never to be forgotten. In the world of gaming, Shaq Fu has earned the title of being one of the worst fighting games ever made.
Just the name makes people cringe, like you don't even want to go there.
In 1993, Shaq was featured on a single by his favorite rap group at the time, Fu Schnickens, whose members Pak Fu, Chip Fu, and Mak Fu dubbed him Shaq Fu. Since Shaq was getting popular and it was a golden era for fighting games, a fighter called Shaq Fu probably made a lot of sense in a boardroom somewhere.
It's a licensing deal. They pay the Diesel a bunch of money to slap his name on something. Shaq Fu.
But there's no need to just reiterate how bad the game is. I mean, Shaq himself has already admitted to it, and of course there's a site dedicated to destroying every copy of the game in existence. But I think there's still some stuff worth talking about that hasn't already been mentioned. In film, Tommy Wiseau's romantic drama The Room has been called the Citizen Kane of bad movies, but it's now used as study material for film students.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
So I thought it might be worth analyzing Shaq Fu simply as a traditional 2D fighter instead of just getting mad at it.
Shaq Fu.
The first thing you notice is that the graphics are pretty good. The animations are detailed and the backgrounds actually have day and night variations, something that wasn't common at the time. As far as graphics go, there's not much to complain about, except that the sprites are really small. This might not seem like such a big deal, but so much of the screen becomes wasted when the fighters get close, making it harder to focus on footsies. Size is so important in fighting games that Street Fighter producer Yoshinori Ono has stated that hands, feet, and fireballs in the series have always been larger than they need to be because they serve as visual markers on the screen to make it easier for players to follow them. But sometimes a developer might want to allow the players to be far away from each other. To solve this, game companies like SNK would introduce a camera that zoomed in and out with varying degrees of elegance. In addition to the small sprites, Shaq Fu has some issues with the interface. It's not a huge deal, but the health bar straining away from the middle makes it harder to compare remaining health because your eyes have to dart back and forth further and further as the round goes on. I know games were still experimenting with this at the time, but it seems pretty unanimous how we like our life bars now, straining towards the middle towards the timer. Speaking of which, I'm all for being creative with the design of the interface, but the timer is sacred and must be left alone. It's the only thing other than the life bar that can determine who wins and loses. Shaq Fu's timer has 5 digits, but only 2 of them are useful. This 0 here is completely unnecessary, and these useless centiseconds are squishing the most important digit. The timer needs to be as clear as possible so that you can know the remaining time from a quick glance in the heat of battle. It doesn't have to look like a masterpiece of contemporary art. Moving right along, I want to talk about sound a bit. Imagine what it would sound like if an old Chinese martial arts master slammed a young street thug onto a rickety bridge. Here's how Shaq Fu thinks that should sound like. As you can hear, or not hear, the sound design is literally lacking. But the biggest problem isn't that the sound design is dull, but that the sound effects are not distinct. Allow me to explain. As mentioned in the 8 frames video, the average reaction time for a visual stimulus is 250 milliseconds, while it's 170 milliseconds for audio. Have you ever noticed that overhead attacks are often silent at the beginning of the animation? This is to make it harder to react to. Audio cues allow you to react 32% faster than just the visual cues alone, and this is why well-made fighting games pay extra attention to the sound effects.
当時は全部効果音もボイスも私がやっていたので、背景の効果音もすごく楽しく作らせてもらったんですけれども、パンチとかキックとかの音がすごくこだわりが企画の方がこだわりがあったので、ものすごくポツをいっぱい食らってたくさんパンチとキックの音を取りました。
It's important for fighting games to have very distinct sound effects for attacks that hit and attacks that are blocked so that you can react quickly with hit confirms, reversals, etc. Just listen to how distinct they sound in the flagship games at the time. Now here's Shaq Fu. The point is, there's tremendous thought that goes into sound design, and it's not all just about making satisfying sound effects, although it helps. But Shaq Fu's sound is far from the biggest problem with the game. That would have to be the controls.
The controls are mutilated. Fucking atrocious.
Everyone remarks about how bad the controls are, but what's causing it? One common complaint is that there's input lag, but when I tested it, it was actually less than Street Fighter V. It was 7 frames, which included my laggy editing monitor, which contributed 2 frames all by itself, so input lag isn't the issue here. The game feels laggy because of what I call state transitions. In most fighters, there are 4 general states you can be in: standing, crouching, airborne, and grounded. Every game does something different when you go from one state to another, and oftentimes it's character or special move specific. For example, when Jago in Killer Instinct lands from his uppercut move, he has about 18 frames of recovery upon landing where he's completely vulnerable. This is so that he can be punished for whiffing a powerful special move and not just spam it constantly. Now imagine if you had this 18 frame penalty every time you did an ordinary jump. That's what happens in Shaq Fu, and it happens before you jump as well, which is known as pre-jump frames. To put it in perspective, landing frames and pre-jump frames are normal in fighters, and there are even mechanics like L canceling to lower these recovery frames. Modern games like Killer Instinct and Street Fighter generally have 4 frames of recovery, but what you can and cannot do within these 4 frames are carefully decided to shape the gameplay. Shaq Fu's 18 frames is just too much and makes it feel like your shoes have glue on them. Another state transition issue happens when you go from crouching to standing. You'd think that there's not much to mess up in this short period of time, but in Shaq Fu, you can't move, attack, or block for 9 frames. This is why there have been so many complaints about button presses not doing anything. You have to literally wait until Shaq gets off his ass to make your move. Again, this isn't to say other games don't have transitions between these 2 states. As a matter of fact, Street Fighter IV has a very sophisticated transitional state when going from standing to crouching, where you're kind of standing and crouching at the same time. It's like the FGC version of Schrodinger's cat, and it's led to a phenomenon called fuzzy guard, which, like Schrodinger's cat, is pretty hard to explain, so I'll let you look it up. One final state transition issue that stood out was when you hit somebody that was grounded, they'd instantly stand up without taking any damage. Lots of games let you hit grounded opponents, but the opponent takes no damage in Shaq Fu, which leads me to believe it was just an oversight. If you look at all the combinations of states there are when you add things like blocking, attacking, absorbing, shielding, parrying, projectiles, this weird command grab that acts like a hit, and everything else, you can start to appreciate how much goes into a simple mechanic and how specialized fighting game design actually is. The knowledge and experience of some of these fighting game developers go back decades. It's no wonder why the Shaq Fu sequel is going to be a beat-em-up and not a fighting game. The company that made Shaq Fu, Delphine Software International, actually had a track record of critically acclaimed games that were bestsellers. But their expertise was in cinematic platformers, which favored realistic animations that mimicked those of an actual human's athletic capabilities with rotoscoping. They literally captured live actors and used each frame as a reference picture to be animated later. This probably explains why there are so many pre-jump and landing frames in Shaq Fu, and why the sprites are so small. It's as if they combined the cinematic platformer genre with the fighting genre, making Shaq Fu possibly the only cinematic platform fighter in existence. If there's any saving grace for this game, it's that it's a one-of-a-kind fighter that's a product of an unlikely and rare combination. But then again, so is cereal and orange juice. Let me know in the comments who your favorite fighting game developer is. This was Gerald from Corey Gaming. Thanks for watching, and see you at EVO. Follow me on Twitter for updates on videos and my inevitable drowning in pools.